Do you remember when Valentine's cards felt heavier? Not emotionally, physically. The paper was thicker. The edges were embossed. The ink left a faint impression if you ran your fingers across the words. You didn't open them quickly. You handled them carefully, because once the envelope was torn, the moment was gone. There were no notifications, no reminders, no digital traces when Valentine's arrived. It arrived slowly, carried by hand or delivered quietly through the mail slot. And for a long time in American history, that was exactly how love was meant to move, slowly, cautiously, and with risk. Valentine's Day did not begin as a shopping event. In early 19th century America, most people didn't celebrate it at all. February passed like any other winter month. Romance existed, of course, but it stayed mostly invisible. Love letters were handwritten, deeply personal, and extremely rare. Writing something down meant permanence. Paper traveled through many hands and privacy was never guaranteed. Mail was often opened in shared rooms. Families gathered around tables to read letters aloud. A careless sentence, a misunderstood phrase, or even the implication of affection could stain a reputation, especially for women. Romantic expression carried consequences. Love existed, but it learned to whisper. Before the 1840s, sending a letter was not a casual act. Postage was expensive, sometimes costing the equivalent of several modern dollars, and the fee was paid by the recipient. That meant affection arrived with a bill. Many letters were refused at the door. Others were never written at all. Romance was reserved for the wealthy, the educated, or the reckless. For everyone else, silence was safer. Then, quietly, America changed the rules. In the 1840s, the United States postal system introduced dramatically lower rates, including the penny post. At the same time, railroads expanded rapidly, stitching together towns, cities, and rural communities. Letters began moving faster, farther, and cheaper than ever before. By mid-century, thousands of post offices dotted the country, and for the first time, ordinary people could afford private correspondence. Emotion could now travel. And once love became affordable, it became repeatable. But repeatable did not mean reckless. Americans did not rush to bear their hearts. Instead, they found a safer solution. Printed words began replacing handwritten risk. Early Valentine cards were not expressions of passion, they were shields. Pre-written verses allowed senders to express feeling, without fully owning it. Decorative borders, paper lace, and formal language made affection look respectable rather than bold. If a card caused embarrassment, there was always an escape. You could say you hadn't written the words yourself. That distinction mattered deeply, especially for women, whose reputations were fragile and whose intentions were scrutinized. In the 1850s, a young woman named Esther Howland recognized this shift before most others. Working from her home in Massachusetts, she began importing lace paper from Europe and printing romantic verses in bulk. Local women assembled the cards by hand at kitchen tables, carefully layering paper, text, and decoration. This wasn't mass romance in the modern sense. It was controlled sentiment. By the time of the Civil War, tens of thousands of Valentine cards were mailed every February. Love no longer had to be invented. It could be selected. Valentine's Day did not become cards and candy because people suddenly felt more romantic. It became that way because America changed how intimacy could safely travel. Before the 1800s, love was risky. Handwritten letters exposed handwriting, education, class, even emotional vulnerability. To write too much was dangerous. To say the wrong thing was permanent. Romance lived in private spaces because public systems were not built to carry it. That changed quietly, not through poetry, but through infrastructure. In the 1840s, the United States postal system began lowering costs and standardizing delivery. For the first time, sending a letter no longer required wealth or special access, and in February of 1847, something unusual happened. Post offices across American cities reported mail sacks heavier than normal. Newspapers noticed it too. Clerks described an unexpected surge of sentimental post. Anonymous notes, decorated papers, folded cards, This was the first moment Valentines stopped spreading through tradition and began spreading through systems. Railroads carried mail farther and faster. Penny postage made sentiment affordable. And anonymity, the most underrated force in romantic history, made expression safer. You could send a feeling without revealing yourself completely. During the Civil War, this shift became emotional survival. Soldiers and families exchanged printed Valentine cards because handwritten letters felt too exposed for wartime mail. Censorship, fear, and distance made personal writing dangerous. Printed words, carefully chosen and widely shared, became emotional armor. These were not love. Poems, they were stabilizers. Love was no longer improvised. It was formatted. By the 1860s, Valentine cards were no longer rare or intimate artifacts. They were produced in batches. Some were sweet, some were restrained, others were cruel, anonymous. Vinegar Valentines designed to mock rather than woo. Even emotional risk had become standardized. Romance was no longer private because society trusted it. Romance was public because systems could contain it, and that containment changed everything. And once love could be selected, it could be displayed. By the late 19th century, Valentine's had begun its slow transformation from private exchange to public ritual. Chocolate, once an exotic luxury, became part of the message. American candy makers didn't just sell sweets, they sold containers, meant to last. Decorative boxes, heart-shaped tins, and ornate packaging turned candy into keepsakes. The chocolate disappeared, the box remained. A Valentine gift no longer said, "I made this." It said, "I planned." As the country entered the 20th century, Valentine's Day began appearing weeks before. February 14th, not in homes, but in department store windows. These displays were quiet, elegant, and deliberate. Lace cards sat under glass. Boxes of candy were stacked carefully. Verses were framed like artwork. There was nothing loud or passionate about them, just suggestion. Couples slowed down to look. Children pressed their faces to the glass. Love was no longer entirely private. It had become something you observed, anticipated, and prepared for. Advertising reinforced the lesson. By the 1910s, Valentine's Day was no longer optional. Newspapers, catalogs, and storefronts told Americans what to buy, when to buy it, and how much was appropriate. Missing the day meant something. For the first time, love came with a deadline. The industry knew exactly who it was speaking to. Women were shown choosing cards, preserving letters and remembering dates. Men were shown purchasing. Women became the keepers of the ritual. Men became the providers of the object. That division shaped Valentines for generations, quietly defining how affection was expressed, remembered, and measured. Commercialization did not erase romance. It stabilized it. It made love safer, predictable, and repeatable. But it also made it smaller. Think about the Valentines you remember most. Not the most expensive one, the quiet one, the card tucked into a drawer, the handwriting you still recognize, the envelope you couldn't bring yourself to throw away. Those moments survived because someone turned feeling into something solid. Once emotion could travel safely, industry learned how to package it. Printers, stationers, and early card manufacturers realized something essential. People did not want to invent sentiment. They wanted to select it. Choosing a card felt safer than writing a letter. Buying words felt less dangerous than creating them. By the late 1800s, American companies were producing Valentine cards specifically for women, not as passive recipients, but as consumers and preservers of ritual. Women controlled household memory. They saved cards, they curated sentiment. Industry noticed. Then, in 1913, the U.S. Post Office introduced parcel post. This single change transformed Valentines forever. Love was no longer limited to words. Objects could travel cheaply. Candy boxes, keepsakes, and small gifts entered the ritual not because they were romantic, but because they were shippable. Valentines stopped being read. It started being unwrapped. Department stores understood the psychology immediately. By the 1920s, Valentines appeared in window displays weeks in advance. Cards were arranged like artifacts. Candy was boxed like heirlooms. Sentiment was no longer spontaneous, it was anticipated. This is where many people assume romance died. But it didn't. Commercialization didn't kill Valentines, it stabilized it. It removed risk. It reduced emotional exposure. It allowed people to participate without inventing vulnerability from scratch. Buying a card was not a failure of feeling. It was a socially acceptable substitute for emotional danger. By turning love into a product, America didn't cheapen it, it made it survivable. So when we think of Valentines today, the cards, the candy, the packaging, we're not looking at corruption. We're looking at preservation. A feeling once too dangerous to write was made safe enough to mail. What do you think changed more? How people loved, or how safely they were allowed to show it? Do you think commercialization protected romance, or quietly replaced it? And what Valentine's gift do you still remember, not because of its price, but because it arrived at the right moment? America didn't turn Valentine's into a business by accident. It did it because people wanted protection from scandal, from misunderstanding, from risk. Romance was reshaped not to inflame, but to endure. And maybe that's why it still lingers. So, tell me, what Valentine's gift do you still remember and why? Was it the object itself, or the moment it arrived? Share it in the comments. And if you're drawn to the forgotten layers hiding inside ordinary traditions, subscribe. There are many more waiting to be remembered.